In July 2011, all of Mexico stood still as they watched a video of cartel workers Felix Gomez Garcia and his uncle, Barnabas Guizo, being dismembered with a chainsaw. Cartels are known for their extreme violence, from beatings to death to being burned alive. Here are some of the most brutal cartel execution methods. El Guizo, the stew. On January 22, 2009, one of the most wanted criminals in Mexico, Santiago Mesa Lopez, was captured by the Mexican army in the Baja Seasons neighborhood of Tijuana. He had been partying excessively for several days in a house there. Commonly known as El Pozolero, which translates to the stew maker, he served as a special cleanup agent for cartels. He is believed to have dissolved over 300 bodies in acid at his Ensenada ranch, about 70 miles south of the border. Santiago gained notoriety for being one of the first to pioneer the El Guizo method. El Guizo essentially means the stew. The process involves placing a person into a large oil drum, filling it with gasoline or acid, and then setting it on fire to create a furnace to burn the victim. This technique is most commonly referred to as making guizo or stew. The originator of this horrific method remains unknown, but several Mexican cartel cells have become infamous for its use. Preparing this deadly concoction involves filling a huge barrel with water and concentrated sulfuric acid, causing the mixture to boil and spit dangerously hot liquid. Once ready, victims are dunked in while they are still breathing. This insane method of torture inflicts excruciating pain, ultimately leading to a slow and agonizing death. The story of Santiago Mesa Lopez. Born to poor parents in mid-April 1964 in Sinaloa, Mexico, Santiago Mesa Lopez struggled with poverty from a very young age. At 13, he worked in construction until the 1990s when he moved to Tijuana in search of a better life. However, tragedy struck when his sister was raped by members of a criminal organization. Seeking revenge, Lopez joined the Tijuana cartel through his childhood friend Eloy. As time passed, Santiago eventually climbed the ranks, and a few years later, his efforts caught the attention of the boss, Efren Perez. One fateful day, Perez entrusted him with the grim task of disposing of bodies, offering him a weekly payment of $600. That marked the beginning of his dark journey. Santiago liquefied his victims in a horrifyingly effective manner. He would submerge cadavers in a tub filled with acid and sodium hydroxide, stirring the bodies and keeping the mixture on high heat for at least 8 hours until they disintegrated. Certain parts of the body, such as teeth, nails, or small bone fragments, wouldn't dissolve. Santiago would burn these remains a second time with gasoline before burying them in a wasteland. Authorities believe Santiago dissolved over 300 bodies in barrels of lye, dumping some of the liquefied remains into a pit at his hillside compound in eastern Tijuana. After his arrest, investigators discovered about 14,000 human remains buried on his ranch. The chilling name for this brutal execution method, El Guizo, makes sense given its focus on cooking victims. According to reports, when Santiago was interrogated, he claimed he had tried to escape from his former boss, Efren Perez, an ex-member of the Arellano Felix cartel. However, none of his attempts were successful. Lopez claimed to have been recruited while working on a farm in 1996, where senior members of the Arellano Felix cartel asked him to carry out an experiment with water and acid in a barrel. Lopez said he had no choice and was forced into recruitment as they threatened him with violence to carry out these acts. Whether or not that's true, no one knows, but the fact remains that he performed these horrifying tasks for many years until he was finally apprehended in 2012. He was initially sentenced to only 10 years and was eligible for release in April 2022, which angered many families in Tijuana. However, on February 5, 2024, his prison sentence was extended by an additional 30 years. The El Guizo method became a favored tool among high-ranking cartel leaders to kill their rivals and traitors. Its gruesome efficiency was unmatched, with victims bound by their hands and feet to fit more easily into an oil barrel while still conscious. The chilling legacy of this method serves as a stark reminder of the ruthlessness within the world of organized crime. Food for the pets. Cartels often torture and kill their victims, and in some cases, have fed them, dead or alive, to tigers belonging to the Chapitos. Since the 1980s, rare, dangerous, and exotic animals have been used as a way to showcase insanely high levels of wealth. Over the years, cartel bosses have adopted another insane tradition. Just as Pablo Escobar kept hippopotamuses and other exotic creatures at his private compound, rare and dangerous pets are still a status symbol today for high-ranking members of the Mexican cartel. These practices imitate the infamous Colombian drug lords of the 80s and 90s. Dangerous pets became a means to show off power and wealth, as well as to send threats. The idea became, the more dangerous a cartel was, the more dangerous the pets found in their homes. Mexican authorities would later reveal that these animals weren't just for showing off. Sometimes, cartels would throw their unfortunate victims into enclosed areas with starving apex predators in the most wicked ways imaginable. The cartel would force their victims to beg for their lives in sheer terror just moments before being torn apart by these wild animals. One of the cartel bosses notorious for employing this gruesome torture method was Heriberto Lazcano. Born into poverty on Christmas Day in December 1974 in Hidalgo, Mexico, Lazcano joined the military at the age of 17. He served in the elite Special Forces, a unit dedicated to combating guerrillas and drug trafficking organizations. Lazcano served in the army for 7 years before deserting on March 27, 1998, when he was recruited by Ogiel Cardenas and Arturo Guzman de Quena to join Los Zetas. Heriberto, also known as Z3 and El Verdugo, the Executioner, became one of the most wanted Mexican drug lords of his time. Authorities described him as a master of torture. He was infamous for using a method known as La Polita. This involved stripping victims naked and brutally beating them with a wooden board. Reports suggest that Lazcano once tied a man to a tree, broke his legs during a savage beating, and left him tied there for 3 days until he died. Lazcano owned a ranch filled with lions and tigers. He was particularly known for killing his victims by feeding them to these wild animals. Although he didn't starve the animals entirely, he kept them hungry enough to eagerly devour any victim he provided. Lazcano reportedly found immense satisfaction in watching his pets tear apart human bodies. He relished the torture process, often laughing at the victim's agony. His general method was to force his victims into a cage with the predators, allowing an audience to witness the horrifying spectacle. Despite the unimaginable cruelty he inflicted, Lazcano never experienced a taste of his own medicine. Instead, he was killed in a 2012 shootout with Mexican military officials. In the summer of 2018, a video surfaced online that shook Mexico to its core. It revealed a horrifying and unsettling scene filmed in the hills of La Union, near the border of Costa Grande and Tierra Caliente. The video depicted the gruesome murder of a father and son by members of a Mexican cartel. The two men were tied up, made to kneel on the ground, their mouths gagged, and their hands bound tightly. The captors interrogated the older man, assaulting him with what appeared to be a large wooden stick. The violence inflicted on him was unimaginably horrific, and just when it seemed it couldn't get worse, the father was beheaded with a small knife resembling a pen, right in front of his son. The most heartbreaking moment in the video was the son's reaction to witnessing his father's death. His tears and the visible shock moved the entire nation. The father's decision not to resist his captors was equally shocking. It seemed he had accepted his fate, possibly due to trauma from previous beatings or being paralyzed by the severity of the situation. After the father was killed, the son endured an even longer and more agonizing ordeal. The captors cruelly flayed his chest with knives. Throughout this gruesome act, the son remained conscious, drifting in and out of shock. The video demonstrated the extreme lengths these cartels would go to enforce their control and ensure their operations ran smoothly. In 2010, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman made headlines after recording a video of himself employing the flaying torture technique on a rival cartel member, Hugo Hernandez. El Chapo used a chainsaw to flay Hernandez and then ordered his men to stitch the victim's stripped skin onto a ball as a grotesque warning for the Juarez cartel. Hernandez's torso was later found in a plastic container, while his remaining body parts were scattered on the streets of Los Mochis as a chilling message to El Chapo's rivals. Cartel members, armed with special knives, would meticulously strip the skin off their victims or peel their faces with sharp objects, all amidst agonized screams. This barbaric practice was reserved for their most severe enemies, including rival cartel members, double agents, and thieves. The sheer brutality of flaying someone demonstrates the unthinkable lengths these criminals will go to maintain their reign of terror. Inflicting such unimaginable pain on a person begging for their life is beyond comprehension. Dermatologists have noted that the common causes of death from flaying include shock, critical loss of blood or other bodily fluids, hypothermia, or infection. They estimate that death can occur within hours or take as long as a few days. If this isn't the definition of dying hard, then what is? Dismemberment. In 2015, Texas law enforcement apprehended Marciano Chano Manon Vasquez, an alleged hitman for the Los Zetas cartel. He was implicated in a 2013 kidnapping involving a former drug trafficking associate. This associate later testified against Vasquez, recounting the horrific events. According to the testimony, Vasquez took the associate to an undisclosed location where he was holding a family of 3 captive. When Vasquez removed the associate's blindfold, he saw a couple and their young daughter standing near a flaming barrel. The witness claimed that Vasquez and other cartel members forced the parents to watch as their daughter was dismembered with an axe. Vasquez is not an isolated case. Many cartel members employ similar gruesome methods. Victims are often injected with drugs such as morphine, adrenaline, or heroin. These substances affect the central nervous system, keeping victims conscious throughout the ordeal. Using heavy, sharp blades or knives, the cartel members dismember their victims limb by limb. To prolong suffering, they intentionally avoid cutting near vital organs, ensuring victims endure agonizing pain for as long as possible. This combination of severe blood loss, infection, and unrelenting pain is a calculated method of torture. The goal? To extract information or instill fear, all while delivering a slow, agonizing death. For the cartel, this method serves a dual purpose, eliminating their target and simplifying body disposal. In some instances, dismembered body parts are left in public places as a chilling message to intimidate anyone who dares to oppose them. One infamous example occurred in October 2010. Israel Rinson, a cartel member, was not just murdered but dismembered after killing the son of one of El Chapo's allies. When El Chapo captured Rinson, he ordered him to be tortured until he fell unconscious. To ensure the process lasted as long as possible, El Chapo had a doctor on standby to prevent him from dying too quickly. El Chapo ordered his men to brutalize him in all sorts of gruesome ways, which ended in the dismemberment of his limbs. His remains were later dumped in the Mexican city of Culiacan. This act of dismemberment is a brutal tactic, showcasing the sheer cruelty deeply embedded within these cartels. Beheading by chainsaw. In 2011, Felix Garcia and his uncle, Barnabas Castro, were viciously beheaded. This incident marked one of the first executions by the cartel to be uploaded for the world to see. A masked individual wielded a chainsaw, positioning the moving blade against their necks, and the grim outcome was inevitable. These men, who had worked for the notorious Sinaloa cartel, made the fatal mistake of stealing from drug lords. Because of this, they paid the ultimate price with their lives. More tales of horror. In August 2008, notorious cartel boss Moises Escamilla May was arrested shortly after he was accused of beheading 12 people in Yucatan, Mexico. These are just a few examples of the horrors orchestrated by these groups. Everyone in and around Mexico understands that getting involved with these cartels is akin to signing a death warrant. While movies have long glorified tales like these, the digital age has brought even more chilling realities. Now, cartels videotape their killings, carrying out these brutal acts as a form of propaganda, much like insurgents in war zones. These videos serve as messages to rival gangs or warnings to government authorities. Decomposing heads and public fear. In September 2011, Mexican police discovered 5 decomposing heads left in a sack outside a primary school in Acapulco. This discovery sent shockwaves through the community, prompting dozens of schools to go on strike due to heightened security concerns. 11 years later, on the other side of the country, 5 more decapitated heads were found in an ice cooler in Tamaulipas. Targeting journalists and ritualistic killings. These brutal tactics aren't limited to specific cartels or regions, they have become a widespread method of control across Mexico. Beyond targeting rival members, these cartels have also been known to attack journalists critical of their operations. This sends a clear message: speak out against them, and you will pay the price. In a disturbing twist, some beheadings are intertwined with the cartel's belief systems, performed as ritualistic acts to fulfill religious or spiritual demands. These practices add another layer of terror to an already horrifying situation. Cannibalism within the narco world has been an open secret in recent years. The CJNG, led by Canelas or El Mencho, has hit the headlines due to these accusations of cannibalism. The CJNG has become one of the dominant cartels in the country, operating in at least 35 states across Mexico and Puerto Rico. The cartels need to ensure that their recruits can handle these increasing levels of violence mentally. They have to suppress their empathy for those they kill or torture and forget that they, too, are human beings. Cannibalism was used as a form of training for recruits to desensitize them to violence and breed fearlessness within them. These shocking public displays of aggression are used to threaten rival groups and show dominance, as part of an arsenal of techniques including demonstrating new weapons and military technologies owned by the group. Recruits are taught how to sever fingers and toes, which is the cartel's favorite torture technique for interrogating rival gangs. During the training process, recruits have to eat dismembered fingers, and upon passing this trial, they progress to larger body parts. If anyone vomited during this ordeal, instructors would retrieve those regurgitated body parts from the ground and force the individual to ingest them again. Furthermore, these recruits also had to sleep beside deceased bodies at night, aiming to desensitize them to death. Experts suggest that this vicious initiation ritual instilled a warped sense of loyalty to the cartel by dismantling their sense of self-identity. Another well-known example is Miguel Trino Morales, known as Z40, the former leader of the Zetas. Miguel had a gruesome habit of consuming the hearts of his victims. He did this as a spiritual ritual, believing it would grant him invincibility against his enemies and authorities. He also did this as a form of warning to rival cartel members. According to a former hitman, Miguel wouldn't only eat these body parts, he would sometimes force other victims to partake in this cruel tradition. Psychological warfare. Contrary to popular opinion, torture isn't always about getting information. Cartels know that most times, people will say whatever just to make the pain go away. The real purpose is to scare other people so that no one dares go against their wishes. Cartels make use of their insane psychological torture by keeping victims in small rooms with limited food and water, making them live in fear. They would use prolonged isolation, terrifying sounds and images, and even mock executions to break them down physically and emotionally. For the smallest of reasons, some victims would lose a finger and ultimately have no fingers left in constant fear of what is to come, with something worse always awaiting them. Their cruelty knew no bounds. Sometimes they would slowly dismember their bodies or utilize any gruesome torture method they could think of. This gives them the power of intimidation, a power they need to remain at the top of the chain. A scary thought about these Mexican cartels is that they don't only intimidate the public and their rivals but sometimes even go after innocent people. An example is the former mayor of La Union, Maria Santos Garastieta Salazar. In November 2012, Maria was kidnapped by the Knights Templar cartel and made to watch as her husband was burned alive with a blowtorch. She then saw them kill 4 more victims in the same way. They then proceeded to sexually assault her before finally deciding to kill her. Her autopsy reported that she died of a traumatic head injury. The Mexican cartel combines extreme violence with psychological manipulation to control their victims, using brutal murders as a warning to comply with their demands. The trial of El Chapo. On February 12, 2019, during the heavily publicized trial of El Chapo, a lot of cartel torture methods were made public, and one of them that stood out was waterboarding. This is an insane method of punishment, also known as Guizo in Spanish. It involves pouring water on a cloth and placing it over the face of the individual being punished, restricting them from breathing. Various forms of waterboarding have been practiced for centuries. It was used during the Spanish Inquisition in the 16th century, by Dutch traders against the British in the 17th century, the Japanese army during World War II, and by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia back in the 70s. But despite how many times it has been used in the past, cartels have now added this deadly Mexican twist to it. This torture technique forces the trauma of drowning as well as causing extreme pain to its victims. It results in lung and brain damage, often leading to oxygen deprivation and, of course, psychological trauma. The Mexican cartels are known for adopting merciless and violent executions for people standing in their way, and this fierce twist is actually making the victim feel a dreadful sensation of drowning. The process is really just waterboarding, but instead of using normal water, the cartel would use carbonated water. In their case, they force the water down the victim's nose, and in more extreme cases, the carbonated water is spiced with chili pepper. The wet cloth also makes it 1,000 times worse. As your face is covered, you are filled with the fear of drowning. The heavier the cloth feels on your face, the more the torture is prolonged. To prolong death and increase the torture, cartels pour water intermittently for as long as possible. If the liquid is poured uninterruptedly, it can lead to death. In simpler words, it is torture out of control. Hanging. In 2016, Mexican authorities found a body hanging from a bridge in Tijuana, just 10 miles south of the U.S. border. The San Diego Union Tribune reported that from January to October 2018, the drug trade had caused the loss of more than 1,250 lives in Tijuana. But just to show how regular this insane occurrence has become in the region, in November 2021, police pulled 9 bodies down from a bridge in Zacatecas, left as a warning between rival cartels. This was an act of retaliation for the mutilation of 14 men, most likely from Los Zetas, who were found in a minivan in Nuevo Leon. The bodies were set up around 6 a.m. and were hanging for about 4 hours before the cops arrived and pulled them down. Hanging people in public sends a message over the turf in disputed areas. These victims are mutilated, abused, and just hanged, carrying signs for all to see. It's not just the cartels that are into this medieval barbarism. These tactics go back to Europe about 500 years ago, and even the Taliban uses them. For Mexican cartels, hanging a rival postmortem in highly visible places sends a message regarding turf in disputed cities. These victims are frequently mutilated, showing signs of abuse, but to the cartels, it doesn't really matter. The more victims they can put up, the more powerful they look. A lot of times, these victims are recovered bodies of rival members who were involved in a shootout or even victims that were kidnapped. This execution style shows exactly why most of these killings happen, to show who's boss in the area. The cartel kitchens. Mexican government figures indicate that at least 60,000 people have disappeared since 2006, yet a 2015 report found only 6 federal court convictions for the crime of forced disappearance. The root cause for most of these disappearances, cartel kitchens. These infamous cartel Mexican kitchens play a vital and disturbing role in their bloody campaign on the streets. If you step inside, you see bloody handprints on the walls, stained clothes, plastic cable ties, machetes, and, as one person observed, the crunch of bones beneath a thick blanket of ash. This was the scene at La Gaia Ranch in northern Veracruz, which was operated by the Los Zetas cartel. After that cartel took over the ranch in 2011, it was used to incinerate their victims. The idea was very simple: they would stalk a target for a while, and instead of killing them and leaving the body lying cold-blooded on the street, they would abduct the target and take them to any of their 12 kitchen locations, where they would torture and extract valuable information from them before killing and cooking the bodies. It has been estimated that over 60,000 people have been casualties of cartel kitchens in Mexico alone. These disappearances have been carried out by different crime groups, all around with motives including kidnapping for sex slavery, organ harvesting, forced labor, ransoms, and even the repression of political activists and journalists. The Mexican authorities are reported to have gone through mountains of human bones, fragments of teeth, nails, and more, in hopes of identifying hundreds of victims who have been tortured in these kitchens. Anyone finding themselves in one of these kitchens experiences an immense form of psychological torture. At first, you see gruesome sights and hear the sounds of other victims screaming in pain, which is enough to break even the strongest of hearts before the actual torture starts. Families are upset and frustrated that this kitchen at the ranch is not a recent discovery. Since 2017, they have forced authorities to search that property more than 4 times, and each time they've done so, they found things that the previous searches had overlooked: 6 dictated victims' femurs, pelvises, jawbones, as well as hundreds of other bone fragments, some of which were burned, were all discovered during separate searches. If one of your loved ones was caught up in these kitchens, how would you feel about your government?